Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Leading from Alignment with our good friend and coach, John Opolewski. How are you today, John?
I'm doing well. It's good to be with you recording today and excited about our subject.
Me too. Well, why don't you introduce it to us? Because I personally, this, we talked about discouragement in the last episode.
Yeah.
This would be one of the most discouraging or difficult things to deal with in ministry, in leadership, would be this. If it doesn't go well, nothing's going well. So tell us about that.
There you go. And the title is called You and Your Marriage.
Yeah.
You and Your Marriage. Jim, the other day you texted me about devoting an episode
Yeah.
to a leader's marriage. You know, and while maintaining confidentiality, I'd like you to maintain confidentiality.
Yeah.
What precipitated that text? I mean, why did you send that to me?
In interaction with pastors and leaders, in interaction with coaching clients, interaction with cohorts, it was a re-emerging theme over and over again. And it was funny. It was people that were killing it in the ministry or not killing it in the ministry. It was people who were highly educated or people that went through some sort of a discipleship program. It was senior pastors and leaders of multi-sites. It was also people that were, had very small congregations. And the common thread of their misery was their marriage was not healthy. No matter what was happening, good or bad in the world around them, this was the thing that was really killing them, I'm a success everywhere I go until I come home. And I can never be a success until, they're seeing the effect on their children, on their congregation. And what's funny is all of a sudden they see this closing door. This will not be sustainable forever. If it continues in the wrong direction, there will be a point where I will have to disqualify myself from a lot of things that God's called me to. And I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do about it. Yeah.
And I think when you find yourself in that scenario as a leader, some of the thoughts that go through your mind might be, I can't talk to anybody about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody can know.
Right.
Which is, I think we said in the last podcast that isolation is really the devil's playground.
It is. Yeah, it is.
And so, Jim, I'm really glad that you brought this to my attention. And what you're saying is really backed up by some solid data.
Yeah.
One of our partners, former partners in ministry, who are now they're not open anymore.
Yeah.
Full Strength Network, they're just wonderful organization that we worked with for 6 years.
Yeah.
They had provided about a year ago or so, provided me with some amazing data.
Yeah.
And this is data that comes from 12,000 sessions.
Right.
Either coaching or counseling sessions over a period of 2 years. So this is the dates for this data are 2022 and 2023.
Okay.
And 12,000 out of 12,000 coaching or counseling sessions over the course of 2 years, here were the top 4 needs that were being addressed, and these are in descending order.
Okay.
1, burnout and exhaustion. That was number 1. The second highest topic or need being addressed was marriage.
Yes.
Both critical scenarios and preventive maintenance.
Yeah.
It was the second highest need being addressed in those 12,000 sessions. That's data, right? That's something that you can't ignore that. And so I want to focus on this second top need, this marriage need this morning. And boy, we could talk about this, Jim, for probably the next 3 or 4 months, right? There's so many pieces to this. And so instead of trying to cram 30 things at our listeners and watchers today, I'd like to focus on maybe 3 things. And Jim, I'm just going to lean on you heavily too, because I know this is something that, has been on your heart to talk about. Sure. But here's 3 things I think are important about our marriage.
Yeah.
First of all, I think healthy marriage requires us to understand that our spouse is our most important human relationship.
Yes.
It's our most important human relationship. And now I know that sounds uber obvious, but when I reflect back on my early years of ministry, where we had 4 young boys.
Yeah.
It was uncanny how work and children muddled
Yeah.
my clarity
Yes.
on this first point. Um, I intellectually I would agree with the statement, but my reality was that the work and the kids seemed to crowd out the
Yeah.
priority of my marriage.
Yeah.
And I believe this to be true. If everything else in my world is going well, but my marriage isn't, then my world is not well.
Right. The whole world. Yep.
Yeah. So what do you think about this first one, Jim? And I have a few more things to say, but I just kind of like
Yeah.
your
No,
your reaction.
I think you're right. Yeah, my kids are great, but my marriage is stale, uh, combative, cold, distant.
Yeah.
I'm not nearly as excited about my parenting as I am about in misery about my marriage. My ministry is growing and everybody thinks I'm wonderful, but I come home to a person that reminds me that I'm failing. I it just, and we've seen it as pastors, people that volunteer for everything. Sometimes they have so much to give and sometimes they're running from home, you know?
Yeah.
So I be very careful that we don't find in other sources what God created us to find only in marriage, that intimacy, that
Good
depth.
word.
I think, one of the lies that's become really popular is, I'm just not happy. Therefore, like, stop, stop, stop. Marriage is not there to make you happy. It's there to make you holy. It's not about
Mm,
living your best life. It's actually about dying to selfishness, to pride.
yeah.
I was a notorious person with a temper. Part of that's the military. Part of that's just the way I got what I wanted. And
Mm,
I broke my wife one day early on in our marriage by just losing my temper and raising my voice. And, she had a terrible childhood and it brought back all those memories. And I realized right away, I've always made excuses. Well, I'm just a fiery guy. I'm just a D on the DISC assessment. I'm just an A on the,
yeah.
I'm just an Enneagram 43 or whatever, like, this is who I am. I'm a cleric. I'm a powerful man. You're a bully. And it wasn't until I loved somebody more than
Mm,
myself that I was forced to face myself. And, being a bully might make you a good cop to some degree, but makes you a terrible husband. So I think God puts
mm.
our spouse in our life because they're a mirror, they're a
That's
scale.
such a good word.
Yeah, yeah. Every guy can relate to this. I'm not sure if women can or not, but you stand in front of the mirror and you suck in your stomach and you point a certain way and you flex and you go, "That's the way I look." But you step on a scale and the dial just spins. It doesn't care what you look like from what angle. It just tells you an honest answer. Marriage is more like a scale than it is a mirror.
Mm,
It just weighs you, And
yeah.
if you're out of shape, if you're, I hurt Dina to the place that I had to confront me. And I think that's one of the main reasons for marriage is not to make you happy, but to make you holy. So it's
Yeah.
not right at home. God's telling you something, God's going to help you
Right.
through it. But yeah, I agree completely. If it doesn't work at home, it doesn't really matter how much money you have in the bank or how many people attend your church or know your name. It's not,
No,
it's
no,
all, it's kind of a lie.
it colors everything.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, our friend David Barringer puts it this way. He said, "Our spouse is our first calling,"
Yeah. Great. Great
and
way to say
I love that the
it.
way
Yeah.
David put that. So with that in mind, I just under this first point, I have a couple of thoughts I'd
Yeah.
like to share. And it's not exhaustive, just a few
Can't
thought
be.
starters, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Jim, I think it's important for us to learn our spouse,
Yes.
um, learn their triggers,
Hmm.
how they react to those triggers, what they really want in life. I have a great friend, and his wife is a friend of mine as well. Their names are Greg and Rochelle Colgrove, and they do this wonderful marriage uh, weekend called the Fun Marriage Workshop. I would recommend if you're looking for a marriage conference that you look up Greg and Rochelle Colgrove's Fun Marriage Workshop. Best marriage
Mm.
conference I have ever been at by a mile.
Wow.
By a
Wow.
mile.
Okay.
Just amazing.
Yeah.
And they taught about triggers
Mm.
and reactions. And figuring out what those were with each other so that we understand each other better. So I know one of the things that I knew this in the back of my head, but it brought it to front and center when they start talking about identifying triggers. And I had two, and first one was rejection, and the second one was that feeling that I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
And it was like a light bulb went on, like, oh, okay. So when that gets pushed, that button gets pushed, here's the way I've been reacting to that button getting pushed. Now that I need to learn a new way,
Yes. Yeah.
but just knowing what I'm dealing with
Yeah.
and knowing what your spouse is dealing with, what are each other's triggers? What are things that I know if I say I'm going to push that button and I just,
Yeah.
I got to stop, right? Because I know my
Right.
spouse.
Right.
And I think right along with that, learning our spouse, not just learning their triggers and the reactions and what they really want in life, it's creating a safe space. I think when we learn it and acknowledge those three things, our triggers, our reactions, our wants,
Mhm.
that creates safety.
Yeah.
And feeling safe to me is like a prerequisite to having a deep relationship with anybody.
Yes. Intimacy. Right. How do you have intimacy without a sense of security
Right.
when you share that most vulnerable part of you that it'll be received? Yeah.
Yeah. So our spouse, our most important human relationship.
Yeah.
And it's my belief that the most powerful influence for good in the church that we pastor or the ministries we lead is the health of our marriage.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me, Jim, that what's going on in our marriages tends to get reproduced in those we lead. So that's the first thing I wanted to push up.
Yeah, that last point I think is really important, John. It creates an atmosphere, doesn't it? If I am dismissive or demeaning or angry or too stern, or if that's the publicly known story of my marriage, it would probably attract other people with the same dysfunction feeling comfortable and repel people with healthy marriages as well, right? So I mean, the health of our marriage really has a lot to do with more than just the health of our marriage or the happiness of our hearts. It has a lot to do with the fruitfulness of our ministry.
Yeah, there's a ripple effect. One of our good friends on this podcast, Josh Spurlock, gave us language around this. He called it limbic resonance.
Yeah.
And that's what's going on the inside of me gets translated to those I'm close to and those that are nearby me.
Yeah.
So Pastor, and I'm speaking to myself. I'm putting myself in the crosshairs here this morning. Remember, what does it profit you to gain the whole world and lose your marriage?
Yeah, right on. Right on.
It just so it's your number one priority. It's your first calling.
Yes.
The second thought, Jim, that I wanted to discuss with you is this idea of healthy marriages demanding healthy marriage rhythms.
Yeah.
And I have a few that I listed. Praying together. I heard somebody say something that really set me free. He said, praying together with your wife can be as much as a 2-sentence prayer sometimes.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a half hour.
Right.
All the time, but making sure you pray together on a regular basis. Exercising together is a great marriage rhythm. Laura doesn't care much for weight training. But we do walk together. And there's more happening than just exercise.
Yeah.
When we walk together, we talk about a lot of stuff. And it's good physically, but it's good relationally for us. Carving out conversational space. And you got to figure out when that works for you. Like for Laura and me, typically it's like the last 30 to 60 minutes of our day. That just seems to work for us. The day's kind of over and we reflect, talk about the day, how we're feeling and what's coming up. And I find that to be, and I'm hopeful that Laura feels the same way. But for me,
hopeful, not confident, but hopeful.
That it's just that's good space for me
Yeah.
to do that. I mean, we go to bed at the same time.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think that's
Can we
important.
push up on that one a little bit? Because I find there are small things that become large things in time. And I think that going to bed at the same time is maybe
Yeah,
not having to get up at the same time. There's something about
yeah,
getting up that can be varied, but going to bed, ending the day in prayer together. If you have to stare at the ceiling for an hour until you fall asleep, it's better than staring at the TV for 4 hours before
there you
coming
go.
to bed.
Yeah.
There's something about that. Could you maybe elaborate on that a little bit more?
And I don't know what I can't speak to it from a psychological perspective.
Yeah.
All I know is here's the progression I've seen is that when I was younger, I mean, I used to stay up watching ball games and,
Yeah.
Laura would go to sleep and pretty soon, that just becomes a habit. And I don't think that's a good habit.
No,
So
it's not.
we've pretty much determined, so we've had a compromise because Laura, she just has this ability to sleep longer than I do.
Yeah.
It's a gift. It's an
Yeah. It
amazing
is. Yeah. Yeah.
gift. And that's a gift I wish I had.
Yeah.
Um, but what we decided is she stays up a little bit later, and I know she's tired, but she hangs in there with me as we're talking. I usually get up earlier than Laura. Almost every day I'm up before she is.
Yeah.
But I I really have liked, so I'll just say it from this perspective. I just like that progression
Hmm.
because in our younger years, it wasn't there as much.
Right.
And I don't know that that was good.
Mm.
Um, so, I mean, I don't have a lot of like content behind that thought. I just think
Yeah.
I've noticed that, and I think it's a healthy thing to do.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I'll state the obvious. Anybody that's tired, alone, and has access to a world that is unfettered by
Mm.
accountability.
Yep.
I just described David and Bathsheba the night that he saw her, right? Tired, alone, and unaccountable. A lot of
Yep.
bad things happen when we're tired, alone, and unaccountable. And I'm not saying if
That's
you do
right.
that, it's because you're looking at something. I'm just saying that if you are going to look at something, you should. And you'll probably be tired. You'll probably be alone, and there'll
Yeah.
probably be no accountability in sight. Um, I just think it's important to hold my wife's hand every night. And like you said, if I prayed for half an hour, Dina would be asleep for 28 minutes of that prayer. I know it. Last night we prayed together. I said, "You fell asleep, didn't you?" She said, "Just a little, just a little." Like, okay, tomorrow night you're praying. I'll fall asleep. But there's something our wives want that they want us to grab their hand. Make them
Yeah.
feel safe. It's
And
there's something important about it.
and Jim, I think, you know, this is gonna sound strange, but
Okay.
I've told Laura this. I said, your voice is soothing to me.
Mm.
So if I've had a day,
Yeah.
it's just, there's just a calmness that comes to me
Yeah.
hearing your voice. And I don't know if that sounds mushy or um I used to tell guys like Laura and I would be talking at night in bed and I'd drift off. And I said, and the guys in our small group start laughing. And
Yeah.
I said, no, I'm not. It's not because she's boring. It's because her voice is soothing. And all the guys said, I'm going to
Right.
tell my wife that
It's
her
a good
voice is
thing that I
soothing.
sleep while you're talking.
So I think going to bed at the same time is a good rhythm. Date
I do
nights are
too.
good rhythms.
I do too.
Regular, mutually satisfying sex is a
Yeah.
good rhythm. The
Yeah.
Bible tells us that that particular rhythm contributes to unity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm sure there are more, and there are people who have written, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, but have
Yeah.
written all kinds of books and content that are far wiser than I am.
Sure.
Uh, but these are some of the things that came to my mind when I start thinking about rhythms.
Yeah. I love that. And
Yeah.
I love that rhythms create a predictability. So if the
Yeah.
baby had a sleepless night, I still know that there's a date night on Friday. If our budget is bad and we don't have any money, I know that we had $11 for 11 days at one point in our marriage. Instead of saying how poor we were and how miserable this was and how we wanted out, we challenged each other every other night to do a $1 date night. We were pregnant with our first child and we had no money. And we were in Bible college for the one semester that I was able to afford to go to Bible college. And we just, it was my turn tonight. So for $1, what can I do to bless my wife. And then the next day it was her dollar and her day. So I guess what I'm saying is if you're both into this, it can be wonderful, creative. And like you're saying, a date can be taking a walk in the woods,
Yeah.
going to a state park, holding hands, taking a walk, soaking your feet in the lake, you know, seeing a skunk, whatever it is. But it's a memory, it's time, it's shoulder to shoulder, it's hand in hand. It's vital because life is so busy and demanding that if we don't carve out the priority things of our life, time with God, time with our spouse, time with our kids, and then everything else, the tyranny of the urgent, we'll find everything else suffering. So there is an order to this. That God has to be first, right? I think your spouse has to be second. I think your kids have to be third, and then everything else has to be fourth.
There you go. And I love that priority.
Yeah.
That priority list. So let's talk about one more here, Jim. And again, we're not pitching today as we're marriage gurus. I'm not a marriage guru. I'm just not.
Yeah.
But I do know this, that if out of 12,000 sessions over 2 years, this was the number 2 need, I have to believe that there are some of us listening and watching today that are wondering, can my marriage be any different than it is now? Can it be, or is it hopeless? Is it always going to be this way? And we want to encourage you and say it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
And that really leads into this third piece, and that is that healthy marriages enlist outside help. Not just when you're in crisis, but as a preventive maintenance tool as well.
Yes.
I think it's important to have a coach or a counselor, maybe a married couple that you look up to and admire, who you can be open with and share what's going on in your marriage. There are a plethora of great marriage books out there. A couple of them that I think are outstanding: Boundaries in Marriage by Cloud and Townsend. 5 Love Languages is a classic.
Smiley.
Fantastic book. Talk about understanding. Earlier we talked about learning our spouse. That book will help you learn your spouse.
It may have saved my marriage, John. I was saying I love you in my language. She was saying I love you in her language, and we couldn't have been speaking. It's Portuguese and Italian. We had no idea when the other one did what they were doing. They were actually saying I love you. We were giving love the way that we received love. So words and physical touch. And she's like gifts and meaningful time. And not gifts like she needed a Mercedes. I picture a bouquet of dandelions that was growing in a ditch as I walked home from work one day. And you'd have thought I gave that woman a dozen roses. We couldn't afford a dozen shoelaces, let alone a dozen roses at that point of our life. But what it said to her is, I was walking home thinking about you, and I couldn't wait to get home to you. And here's a bouquet of dandelions. She put them in water, like they were weeds growing in the ditch, but they were, because I was thinking about her, those dandelions became love to her. So if you don't understand what I'm talking about, get the book and read it. Read it with your spouse, and you'll find that both of you may be screaming I love you in your various languages, and you're feeling rejected or misunderstood. You're not. You're speaking Portuguese, and they don't understand Portuguese until you understand what the other one's trying to say, and then love your spouse the way that they want to be loved. It can be very discouraging because you feel like if you ever said to yourself, I feel like I'm the only one in this marriage who's giving, you need to read that book.
It's just a phenomenal resource. We want to encourage you to do that. Like I said earlier, take advantage of marriage conferences. And again, I highly recommend the Fun Marriage Workshop. And you could just Google. I mean, Greg and Rochelle have never asked me to promote their stuff ever. But we're not getting any fee from them for doing this. It's just, hey, it is just a top-notch experience. You can Google Fun Marriage Workshop, and you'll locate them. Have them at your church. You will be amazed at the quality, and it actually is fun. It's not just quality info. It is a blast of a weekend. So get outside help. Humble yourself. And admit, I can't do this marriage thing on my own. I need help. So Jim, those are my thoughts around this most important subject today. I love it. Well, I love that you didn't say do these 3 things and you'll have a happy marriage, because
it's not a 3-number combination lock. It's far more complex than that. But
it is.
But if we're spending time together and being honest, if we're praying together, being honest, if we're rubbing shoulders with people who are what we'd like to become, we're heading in the right direction. So I guess I say this too. We do have, John, an ongoing relationship with Josh Spurlock and that whole counseling ministry that's there. And the nice thing is, when I counsel somebody's marriage inside my church, and then I teach on marriage 6 months later, they think I'm talking about them, and I'm not. It's just that their issues are common enough that it should be taught to a mass audience. But when my counselor is someone I'm never going to run into at the grocery store, they're never going to preach at my church, so we would recommend that, right? We would recommend finding 100%. Somebody, and we recommend Josh's ministry of counseling, which is what dozens, if not hundreds, of online Christian counselors.
Let me just real quick, and I wasn't planning on this, but just go to mycounselor.online and tell them that Converge Coaching sent you, and you'll get a discount on your first session with them. So great resource. We love Josh. We love his organization. They do great work.
Yeah. We've had a family counselor, Dina and I, and our boys in their marriages. We've had the same counselor as a family, does not attend our church. And the guy is brilliant. He makes me cry every time I see him. And I walk in and say, I'm not going to cry. 10 minutes later, I'm reaching for the hankies because I think I know my problem. And I just don't. If I knew my problem, I'd fix my problem. The reason I'm seeing a counselor is he can just see through me or something. It's weird.
Yeah.
And he gets straight to the root in a matter of just, an hour or two, a session or two, has provided profound ministry, profound help. So people are good at this. We might as well take advantage of them. And
that's right.
And can I just say this? People say, well, counseling is expensive. You ever tried to hire a divorce lawyer? A lot more expensive. So let's make investments that are proactive rather than reactive. So God bless you, our watchers and listeners. We know that this can be a real place of discouragement and difficulty, but it doesn't have to stay that way. There is hope.
That's right.
God will lead you through it if you do some of the things John's talked about, some of the things his books will talk about, this conference. Just make investments. No one ever got a happy marriage by accident. It's on purpose. So live that purpose. Pour into that. Don't wait for emergencies. Be proactive in the development of your marriage. It'll pay back dividends like nothing else. So God bless you. We're praying for you, for your families, for your ministries as you continue to lead from alignment.